"Don't move, or I'll shoot." The words tore through the early morning stillness like a whip crack, sharp, brutal, and aimed straight at the dignity of a woman who had done nothing wrong. Danielle Hayes didn't flinch. She stood frozen, her hands lifted in calm defiance, not fear. In front of her, Officer Colin Mercer held his gun like a badge of God, his finger twitching near the trigger, adrenaline and power surging through him like wildfire. No witnesses. No backup. Just a dark alley behind a shuttered store in rural Georgia. It should have been her word against his. And for women like Danielle, that usually meant no word at all. Within minutes, she was face down on the hood of the squad car, wrists bruising under tight handcuffs, the officer's voice echoing lies into his radio. "Suspect resisted arrest. Possible attempt to grab my weapon." That lie would become the spark that ignited the fire. And by the time it reached the courtroom, it had become something else entirely, a showdown between a man who thought his badge made him untouchable, and a woman he never should have underestimated. The sun had barely risen when the courthouse filled to the brim. Locals in faded jeans and wrinkled button-downs packed the wooden benches. The press scribbled hastily, their cameras tucked just low enough to avoid being banned. Whispers rippled across the aisles, each voice tugging at half-truths. "Did you hear? She tried to attack him." "No, I heard she was just standing there." "Well, she must have done something." All eyes eventually turned to the defendant's table. Danielle Hayes sat still, too still, like a stone before the storm. Her blouse was crisp white, slacks neatly pressed. Her posture was upright, military almost. Her skin, a rich mahogany hue, caught the fluorescent lights above like polished bronze. Her hair was braided tightly and rested gently on her shoulders. She wore no makeup. No jewelry. Just calm. Controlled. Poised. But there was something more, something off to the trained eye. Not fear. Not guilt. But focus, a burning intelligence behind her silence. You didn't need to be a lawyer to feel it. This wasn't the kind of woman who crumbled. This was the kind of woman who waited. At the front of the courtroom, the bailiff's voice boomed. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Leonard Price." An older white man in a navy robe shuffled in, his silver hair slicked back with effort. His eyes, tired but sharp, scanned the room. When they landed on Officer Mercer, there was a flicker of familiarity. Mutual respect. Perhaps even bias. Mercer, in full uniform, sat at the plaintiff's table with arms folded and chin high. His smile was subtle, smug. He looked like a man who had already won. Behind him, 3 other officers filled the back row, a silent wall of blue and iron. Danielle never once looked their way. Her lawyer, Marcus Bell, a young black attorney not long out of law school, sat beside her. He fidgeted nervously with his tie. Papers shifted under his sweaty palms. He glanced at Danielle, but she didn't return the look. Her eyes stayed locked on the judge. "State of Georgia versus Danielle Hayes," the bailiff declared. Gasps rustled across the gallery. The case had already made headlines. "Decorated officer assaulted by civilian," the headlines had screamed. What none of them knew, what Mercer himself didn't even suspect, was that this civilian had spent more time facing death than he had facing real danger. Danielle stood slowly as the judge addressed her. Her movements were precise, like every gesture had already been rehearsed in the mirror of her mind. Officer Mercer leaned back with a chuckle. He didn't see an opponent. He saw a target. And that was his first mistake. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice cracking slightly, "the defense is ready." Judge Price nodded. "Officer Mercer, take the stand." Mercer rose with confidence. His walk was purposeful, theatrical. He adjusted his collar, straightened his tie, and gave a polite smile to the jury, just enough to charm, not enough to seem smug. But Danielle saw it. The extra pause before he sat. The way he glanced sideways at her. The twitch in his right hand. He was performing. She was assessing. On the stand, Mercer's voice was steady, almost robotic from years of practice. On the morning in question, he began, I was responding to a report of suspicious activity behind a closed business on West 3rd Street. That's when I observed the defendant loitering. A soft murmur fluttered through the courtroom. Loitering. The word had been used for decades as a lazy catch-all, especially for black folks minding their business. When I asked her to identify herself, Mercer continued, she became aggressive, confrontational. She raised her voice, refused to comply. When I attempted to de-escalate, she shoved me and reached toward my firearm. That was it. The sentence that would later collapse his career. But in this moment, it struck like lightning. The gallery gasped. Marcus tensed. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Danielle didn't move. Not a muscle. Her gaze rested on Mercer's face like a scalpel ready to slice through pretense. Thank you, Officer Mercer, Judge Price said. You may step down. Mercer returned to his seat, casting another glance her way. This time, his smirk was wider. Danielle remained still. Like a loaded weapon that hadn't been fired, yet. Marcus stood, trembling slightly. Your Honor, he began, before we proceed. Save it for cross-examination, Mr. Bell, Judge Price cut in sharply. Marcus looked like he might sink into the floor. Danielle leaned toward him, whispering just loud enough. Stay calm. Stick to the facts. He nodded, but his hands still trembled. The prosecution rested its case, and with it came a heavy pause. The judge checked his watch. The spectators leaned forward. Mercer, now reclining, winked at his fellow officers. And then, finally, the judge turned. Ms. Hayes, he said, skepticism laced in every syllable, your turn. Danielle stood. Every eye turned to her. Every breath was caught mid-air. She walked to the stand, not like a woman accused, but like a soldier stepping onto sacred ground. The moment she sat, the silence became suffocating. Ms. Hayes, the prosecutor began, his smile blade sharp. Can you explain your behavior that morning? Danielle adjusted the microphone slowly. Then she spoke. I can. But first, I need to clarify something. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom. The officer's statement is not just inaccurate. It's a lie. The room inhaled at once. And held its breath. Because everyone could feel it. The truth was coming. And nothing, not a badge, not a lie, not even the system, was going to stop it. A courtroom is a peculiar kind of battlefield. There are no bullets, no screams, no bloodshed. But the wounds it inflicts run deeper, carved not into flesh, but into memory, etched forever in the souls of those who dare to stand alone and speak truth to power. Danielle Hayes sat in the eye of that quiet storm, her body calm, her mind sharper than the silence around her. Across the aisle, Officer Colin Mercer leaned back in his chair, his fingers laced behind his head, legs spread with practiced ease. He had the look of a man who believed the game was already over, that the system was stitched in his favor like a custom suit. He'd told his story, the one that framed her as violent, unstable, threatening. And by all appearances, it had landed well. Why wouldn't it? He was white. He was a cop. She was black. She was a civilian. For years, that had been enough. The prosecution took the floor first. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor began, stepping before the jury with a voice that hummed with calculated authority, what we've heard from Officer Mercer is not only consistent, but compelling. His testimony is clear, direct, and supported by his years of commendable service. He responded to a disturbance. He approached a woman behaving suspiciously. And in return for doing his job, he was assaulted. He paused, letting the word hang like a hammer over Danielle's head. This case isn't complicated, he continued, pacing slowly, gesturing to the jury with an open palm. It's not a debate about politics or perception. It's about a single moment, a clear violation of the law by a citizen who refused to cooperate with law enforcement. Danielle watched him closely, noting the deliberate simplicity in his delivery. He was speaking not just to convince, but to lull, trying to turn complexity into black and white. When he finished, he gave a nod to the jury and returned to his seat beside Mercer, who met his gaze with a faint smirk, like two chess players anticipating the checkmate. Marcus Bell stood slowly. The moment he rose, the tension in the room thickened. A young black man in a gray suit, barely into his 30s, with ambition in his heart and sweat on his brow, now faced down not just a prosecutor, but an entire system stacked like a tower of dominoes waiting to fall the wrong way. He approached the bench, swallowing the lump in his throat. Danielle didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her presence was an anchor. He drew a breath. Your Honor, the defense would like to proceed with cross-examination. Granted, Judge Price said, folding his hands with a weary sigh. Marcus turned toward Mercer, who had already returned to the witness stand. Officer Mercer, Marcus began, his voice steady, you testified that Ms. Hayes became hostile when you approached her behind a closed business. Is that correct? Yes, Mercer replied, resting an elbow on the armrest casually. She raised her voice, refused to identify herself, and was physically aggressive. And during this time, Marcus continued, you claim that she attempted to reach for your weapon? Yes. That's a very serious accusation. It is. Were there any witnesses? No. Any surveillance cameras? Not that I'm aware of. Body camera footage? Mercer hesitated, only for a second, but in a courtroom, a second could stretch into eternity. No, he said finally. My camera malfunctioned. There it was. The escape hatch. The ghost in the machine. The invisible defense that had saved more lies than truth in 1,000 other cases. Marcus stepped forward. How long have you been on the force? 11 years. How often has your body cam malfunctioned during an arrest? Rarely. But it did, this time. Mercer's jaw clenched. Yes. During an arrest in which you say the suspect was violent, aggressive, and attempted to disarm you? Yes. Amazing timing, wouldn't you say? The prosecutor rose. Objection. Sustained, Judge Price said. Mr. Bell, stick to the facts. Marcus nodded, holding back the fire building in his gut. I'll rephrase, he said. Officer Mercer, do you have any evidence, any physical evidence at all, that Ms. Hayes attempted to assault you? I have bruises, Mercer said defensively. Have those been documented by a physician? Mercer hesitated again. No. No photos. No. No audio. No. Then all we have, Marcus said slowly, letting the words slice the silence, is your word. Mercer didn't answer. He didn't need to. Danielle had not moved once. Her face was still unreadable. But her fingers, folded gently in her lap, tightened slightly, just once. Marcus noticed. He knew what it meant. She was ready. But the time hadn't come yet. He turned back to the jury. No further questions, Your Honor. Officer Mercer, you may step down, the judge said. Mercer returned to his seat more slowly this time. His smirk had softened into something less certain. It was her turn now. The prosecutor rose again, this time with a different energy. The smile was tighter. The voice is more clipped. Ms. Hayes, he said as she took the stand. You've heard Officer Mercer's account. Do you deny that you were present at the scene? No, Danielle said clearly. I was there. Do you deny refusing to identify yourself? I didn't refuse, she replied calmly. I asked why I was being questioned. And do you deny raising your voice? I matched his tone, she said. Which had already escalated before I spoke. The prosecutor's face twitched, but he masked it with a smirk. Ms. Hayes, he said, walking closer, isn't it true that you were confrontational? That you challenging a police officer's authority? Danielle looked at him, her dark eyes steady. I challenged his motive. The courtroom was still. Isn't it true, the prosecutor pressed, that when Officer Mercer attempted to question you, you became aggressive? Danielle didn't blink. Isn't it true, she interrupted softly, that some people think a black woman asking a question is an act of aggression? The silence cracked like thunder. The prosecutor opened his mouth, but the words stumbled. Objection, he muttered, though it sounded more like a whisper. The judge didn't respond right away. He was watching Danielle now, perhaps truly seeing her for the first time. Continue, he said at last. Danielle took a breath. Officer Mercer grabbed my arm, she said. I asked him to release me. He refused. When I tried to pull away, he slammed me against the car and accused me of reaching for his weapon. And did you? No, she said, her voice cutting through like glass. I didn't reach. I didn't lunge. I didn't resist. I spoke. She paused. Then added. And he couldn't stand that. In the back of the courtroom, Mercer shifted. His jaw was clenched now. The smirk had evaporated. His hands folded tightly, almost white at the knuckles. Danielle's words had started something. A fracture. A fault line. And it would only grow from here. The judge called for a recess, but the tension in the room didn't break, it settled, like a fog thick with foreboding. Danielle returned to the defense table, her steps precise. Marcus leaned toward her. Are you ready to reveal everything? Danielle's lips curled into the faintest, almost imperceptible smile. Not yet, she whispered. Let them underestimate me one more day. Silence is a strange thing in a courtroom. It's not quiet. Not truly. It hums. It breathes. It watches. After Danielle Hayes gave her testimony, the silence wasn't absence, it was attention. The kind that doesn't blink. The kind that waits for you to stumble. She didn't. When the court reconvened that afternoon, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. Something had shifted, subtly but undeniably. The jury looked at Danielle with something new in their eyes, not sympathy, not suspicion, but something rarer. Curiosity. The kind of curiosity that cracks walls. The judge returned to the bench with the rhythm of routine, but even he sensed the shift in tone. He cleared his throat with more purpose than usual. Mr. Bell, he said, glancing toward the defense table, do you have any further questions for your client? Marcus stood, his tie freshly straightened, hands steady for the first time since the trial began. I do, Your Honor. He turned to face Danielle on the stand. She sat upright, her posture crisp and still, like a flag raised high in a storm. Ms. Hayes, Marcus began, when Officer Mercer approached you, did he inform you of your rights? No, she said simply. Did he state why he was stopping you? No. Did he offer any explanation for why he considered your presence suspicious? She paused for half a second. My presence was the explanation. Marcus let the statement sit. A murmur fluttered across the gallery. Was there anything in your behavior that could have justified the escalation? Danielle shook her head slowly. Unless checking your phone is now considered a hostile act. A soft chuckle rippled through the courtroom, quiet, uncertain. The judge didn't gavel it down. He let it pass, like a breeze. Marcus stepped closer. Ms. Hayes, he said, let's address the allegation that you reached for Officer Mercer's weapon. Did you? No, Danielle said, her voice as solid as stone. I never reached for anything. Did you say anything that might have been interpreted as threatening? No. And your tone? Firm. Not loud. Not angry. Marcus turned to the jury. I ask you to consider this: a woman alone, unarmed, with no criminal history, approached by a man with a badge and a gun. Who had the power? Who had the fear? He turned back to Danielle. Ms. Hayes, how would you describe Officer Mercer's demeanor during the encounter? She tilted her head slightly. Authoritarian. Impatient. Confrontational. Did he appear afraid? No. He appeared in control. Did he offer you the opportunity to comply peacefully? He never gave me the chance. That was when Marcus shifted his tone. Ms. Hayes, earlier you said, my presence was the explanation. Could you elaborate on that? Danielle's eyes scanned the room, landing for a moment on the jury, then drifting back to Marcus. In certain places, at certain times, people like me don't need to do anything wrong to be considered a threat, she said. We just need to be there. Marcus let the words resonate. Then he gestured to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Prosecution. Judge Price asked. The prosecutor, a man now visibly uncomfortable in his tailored armor, stood. He approached Danielle with an air of restrained hostility. Ms. Hayes, you've described Officer Mercer's behavior as aggressive, confrontational, even prejudiced, he began. Do you have any evidence of that? Only what I experienced, she replied. So, no recordings? No witnesses? No. And yet you expect this court to believe your version over that of a decorated officer? I expect this court to seek the truth. The prosecutor smirked. Let's talk about that truth, then. You've presented yourself here as calm, rational, and composed. Would you say you've always been that way? Yes. Even under pressure? Yes. He stepped closer, voice sharpening. Even when a police officer places his hand on your arm? Danielle's tone didn't waver. Especially then. Why? Why wouldn't you react? Why wouldn't you panic? She leaned forward slightly. Because I've been trained not to. The room stilled again. A flicker of something danced behind the prosecutor's eyes, confusion, maybe. Or fear. He opened his mouth to follow up, but paused. He didn't know where it would lead. And that alone was enough to stop him. No further questions, he muttered. As Danielle stepped down from the witness stand, her steps slow and deliberate, the energy in the room thickened. The truth hadn't been shouted. It had been whispered, calmly, confidently. And it had landed. She returned to her seat beside Marcus, who leaned in. You gave them something they didn't expect, he whispered. Danielle didn't smile. Her eyes were still fixed forward. They haven't seen anything yet. The next day brought a new kind of electricity. Word had spread through whispered conversations in diners, posts on message boards, and speculation in online forums. This case was no longer local. It was viral. Not for violence. Not for scandal. But for the unknown. Who was Danielle Hayes? Reporters lined the courthouse steps that morning, their questions clicking like camera shutters. Inside, every bench was full. Even the standing room brimmed with bodies leaning against the back wall. And when Danielle entered, neat, pressed, still in black and white, the room went silent. She didn't perform. She didn't posture. But somehow, her presence swallowed the air. Judge Price looked over the room with a furrowed brow. I remind all parties, he said, this courtroom is not a circus. We will proceed with order and focus. He turned to Marcus. Mr. Bell, do you have anything further before we move to closing statements? I do, Your Honor, Marcus replied. The defense would like to present new video evidence. The room buzzed instantly. The prosecutor shot up. Objection, Your Honor. This is irregular. You'll have a chance to respond, the judge said calmly. Let's see the footage. The courtroom technician inserted a USB drive. The screen at the front flickered to life. The video was grainy, taken from a smartphone across the street. The angle was imperfect, partially blocked by a tree. But the audio was crystal clear. Marcus stepped aside. Let the court hear what happened. The footage played. First, Danielle, standing quietly on the sidewalk, looking down at her phone. Then Mercer's voice, loud and abrupt. Hey! You don't belong here. Danielle looked up, her voice calm. Excuse me? Mercer stepped closer. I said, what are you doing here? I'm checking directions, she replied. ID, now. Have I done something wrong? Then the shove. Then the command. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. And Danielle's reply, calm but firm. I'm not resisting. Let go of my arm. And finally, clear and searing. Women like you don't get to question me. The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, and curses under breath. A few people stood, shocked. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, his face crimson. Order. Order in the court. Marcus turned toward the jury. That, he said simply, is the truth. When the noise subsided, Marcus returned to the defense table. Danielle didn't react. Her eyes were fixed on Mercer. Across the aisle, the officer sat pale and stiff, lips pressed into a hard line. His hands gripped the edge of the table. His composure, once so smug, had cracked wide open. Judge Price looked over the room, his voice unusually low. We will recess for 30 minutes before closing arguments. The courtroom emptied slowly, as if the floor might give way beneath their feet. Reporters rushed out to send updates. Spectators buzzed in clumps of disbelief and fury. Danielle walked calmly down the aisle. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Truth had spoken for her. In the hallway, Marcus caught up to her. You cracked him, he said breathlessly. That video. Danielle turned toward him. That was one lie, she said. Now let's expose the system that lets men like him keep lying. The wind had changed. Not just outside, where the late autumn breeze stirred the yellow leaves on the courthouse steps, but within the very soul of the trial. The air inside the courtroom was different now, charged, brittle, restless. Like the moment just before lightning cracks across the sky. Officer Colin Mercer, once the emblem of confidence, now looked like a man trying not to drown. Every breath was shallower. Every glance flickered with unease. His comrades in uniform, seated behind him like a line of loyal statues, had grown still and uncertain. They hadn't spoken. They didn't need to. The footage had said everything. But there was still one question lingering in the air, unspoken but loud as thunder. Who, exactly, was Danielle Hayes? That evening, after the courtroom had emptied and the whispers had followed them into the shadows, Marcus Bell stood outside Danielle's modest home, heart pacing faster than his thoughts. He clutched his briefcase like it was a lifeline, but inside, it only held questions, more now than ever. Danielle opened the door before he could knock, as if she had been waiting. She wore a navy sweatshirt and black pants, her braids pulled back into a simple bun. No courtroom presence. No stage face. Just a woman, guarded, calm, and tired of being misunderstood. Come in, she said. Marcus stepped inside. The house was quiet. Warm. Lived in. Sparse but intentional. A book sat open on the coffee table, spine cracked and worn, Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. He noticed the photo first, on the mantel. A younger Danielle, in full military dress uniform, standing beside an older black man with stripes on his sleeve and pride in his eyes. Behind the photo, encased in glass, was a perfectly folded American flag. Marcus turned slowly toward her. His throat was suddenly dry. I need to know, he said. Danielle didn't answer right away. She walked to the mantel, picked up the flag with careful hands, and sat on the armrest of the couch. "I never wanted this to be about who I was," she said. "Only about what was done to me." Marcus sat down across from her, setting the briefcase on the floor. "Danielle, whatever it is, it's time." She nodded. Then, quietly, almost reverently, she placed the flag on the table between them and walked to a tall, dark shelf in the corner. She pulled out a leather-bound folder. The edges were frayed, but the spine was intact, like something worn through battle, but still standing. She handed it to him. He opened it slowly, unsure of what he expected. Inside, the documents were neatly arranged. A copy of a DD 214 discharge form. Commendation certificates. Training certifications. Deployment orders. Photographs, some black and white, some sepia-toned, others sun-bleached but sharp. Danielle in fatigues, Danielle rappelling down cliffs, Danielle in a war zone, holding a rifle with sand on her cheek and calm in her eyes. At the top of the first page. Lieutenant Commander Danielle Hayes. United States Navy SEAL, retired. Service years, 2001 to 2021. Marcus froze. 20 years. Combat. Classified operations. Joint Task Forces. Medals for Valor. Letters from commanders and generals. "You were a SEAL," he whispered. Danielle nodded once. "Lieutenant Commander. 3 tours. 2 continents. One too many times, I thought I'd never come home." Marcus sat back, the weight of the truth settling on him like armor. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her answer was quiet, but heavy. "Because I didn't want to win by reminding people I was once useful to their version of patriotism. I wanted them to believe me as a woman. As a black woman who deserves truth without a medal attached to it." He blinked, stunned not just by the logic, but by the burden. "You thought they wouldn't believe your humanity unless they saw your uniform." She smiled faintly. "Now you're beginning to understand." They sat for a long time, the silence now no longer heavy, but honest. Marcus flipped through the last pages. A medical report. A therapy letter. A final commendation from the Department of Defense upon retirement, exemplary service in the defense of freedom and national security. He closed the folder slowly. "I need to present this." "I know. Tomorrow?" "Yes." He looked at her again, trying to reconcile the courtroom defendant with the soldier in the folder. Then he realized the truth, they were the same. Danielle Hayes didn't just fight in war zones. She fought everywhere. The next morning, the courthouse steps were swarmed. Local journalists had been joined by regional networks. A few national outlets. Rumors had run wild overnight. "She's some kind of veteran. I heard she was special forces." "Nah, that can't be. Why would she hide that?" Inside, the courtroom was filled by 8:15. By 8:45, the gallery was standing room only. And at 9 a.m. sharp, Judge Leonard Price entered. "All rise." Danielle entered shortly after. But this time, she wore something different. Not black and white. Navy blue blazer. Pin on her lapel. The seal trident, gleaming like quiet thunder. The room froze. Mercer stiffened. The prosecutor looked up from his notes, eyebrows knitting with concern. Marcus stood slowly. "Your Honor," he said clearly, "with the court's permission, the defense would like to call the defendant back to the stand for an addendum to her testimony." Judge Price narrowed his eyes, glancing at the prosecution. The prosecutor gave a reluctant nod. "We'll allow it." Danielle walked to the stand. Each step was measured, deliberate, not defiant, but certain. When she sat, she adjusted the microphone with care. Marcus stepped forward. "Ms. Hayes, or should I say, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, can you please state your background for the record? She looked out at the jury, not seeking sympathy, but respect. My name is Danielle Hayes, she said. I served in the United States Navy for 20 years. I am a retired lieutenant commander. I was a Navy SEAL. I deployed in multiple combat zones. I led tactical teams. I trained elite units in survival, de-escalation, and force restraint. The courtroom was breathless. I came home with medals. I also came home with nightmares. And yet, what I didn't expect, was to be treated like a criminal on my street, by a man with less training, less discipline, and more unchecked power than any soldier I ever knew. She paused. I didn't raise my voice because I was taught to assess threats. I didn't fight back because I was taught to survive. I didn't lie because I was taught to stand in truth, even when no one wants to hear it. The prosecutor stood, his voice less confident now. Lieutenant Hayes, why didn't you disclose this earlier? Because I wanted you to see me as a woman, not a weapon. And now? Now you see both. Marcus returned to the jury. She's not a symbol, he said. She's not a shield. She's a person. And she was profiled, shoved, and slandered by a man who thought she'd stay silent. He turned back to Mercer. He picked the wrong woman. The judge recessed for the day, but the trial was no longer a question of fact. It had become a reckoning. That night, on news stations and live streams, Danielle's name trended. Not just as a defendant, but as a warrior. As a survivor. As a truth-teller. And by morning, the walls of Mercer's fabricated narrative would begin to collapse, not just because of who Danielle was, but because she had finally let the world see it. Not as a weapon, but as a mirror. There's a moment in every storm when the sky turns still. Not calm, not cleared. Just still. Like the wind itself is watching. That was what the courtroom felt like when Danielle Hayes revealed she was Lieutenant Commander Hayes, United States Navy SEAL, retired. The silence wasn't due to awe alone. It was the sound of reckoning beginning to settle. Not just for Officer Colin Mercer, but for every badge, every title, every system that had long assumed truth didn't belong to women like Danielle. The following day, the air in the courtroom was sharper. People arrived early and lingered at the doors. The press benches were full before 8 a.m., and conversations hushed the moment Danielle walked in. She wasn't smiling. She never did. But she held herself higher now, not because she'd won anything yet, but because she'd finally been seen. At the plaintiff's table, Mercer sat rigid. The uniform that once wrapped him in presumed authority now clung to him like a costume. His jaw was tight, hands clasped, eyes darting too often toward the door, as if hoping someone might interrupt this collapse. No one would. Judge Leonard Price entered with a seriousness that hadn't left him since the video was played. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. Marcus Bell stood at once. Your Honor, he said, voice crisp with a new confidence, the defense would like to submit additional evidence pertaining to Officer Mercer's credibility. The prosecutor shot up. Objection. Irrelevant to the charges at hand. Judge Price narrowed his eyes. Mr. Bell. This is not a character attack, Your Honor, Marcus said calmly. This is about a pattern. A pattern that speaks directly to Officer Mercer's behavior in this case. The judge nodded slowly. Proceed. Marcus walked to the jury with a manila folder in hand. His steps were deliberate. Not dramatic, just focused. Controlled. The way Danielle had taught him, even without saying a word. This, he said, holding up the folder, is Officer Colin Mercer's internal affairs record, obtained through lawful discovery procedures. Redacted in part, but telling in whole. He handed copies to the court clerk, who passed them to the jury and the judge. The room exhaled as papers rustled and eyes scanned. Marcus waited. He wanted the silence to speak before he did. There are 6 complaints, he said softly. 6. Over the last 9 years. He raised a hand. 1 for excessive force against an unarmed teenager who refused to comply. 1 for an unlawful search. 1 for racially charged language during a routine traffic stop. 1 for drawing a weapon on a man walking his dog at night. And 2 for failure to file accurate reports. None of them resulted in suspension. None went to disciplinary board review. He paused. Then let the blow land. All 6 were quietly closed. The murmurs came instantly. Spectators shifted. A few jurors raised their brows. Even Judge Price leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a thin, thoughtful line. Mercer's face, once proud, now seemed carved in stone, hard, pale, and beginning to crack at the edges. The prosecutor stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is hearsay. These are unresolved complaints, not convictions. Marcus turned toward him. Precisely, Your Honor. They were never resolved. Because no one ever made it this far. The judge raised a hand. Let the jury decide what weight to give it. The prosecutor sat down sharply, but his hands were restless on the table. Marcus turned back to the jury. This case is not about a single lie, he said. It's about a pattern. A culture. One where authority is given, not earned. Where the truth gets buried under paperwork, and power protects itself. He walked slowly now, his voice steady. If Officer Mercer could lie on this stand so easily, if he could accuse a decorated Navy SEAL of a violent act she did not commit, ask yourselves, what else has he lied about? He placed the final document on the projector, a written statement from one of Mercer's former partners. Anonymous, redacted, but damning. His tone changes when he deals with black civilians, it read. Especially women. He knows the camera won't always catch it. The judge called a brief recess. Danielle sat quietly at the defense table, eyes steady ahead. Marcus leaned in. This is it, he said. The turn. Danielle didn't nod. She didn't need to. I'm not here to turn the tide, she replied. I'm here to make sure it doesn't shift back again. When the court resumed, Mercer was called back to the stand. This time, he moved more slowly. The confidence that once laced his every motion had been hollowed out. He adjusted his tie twice before sitting, his mouth a straight line that tried to look stoic but failed. Marcus approached. Officer Mercer, he said calmly, do you deny the existence of these complaints? I can't comment on open investigations, Mercer said quickly. Marcus lifted an eyebrow. So they're still open. Mercer hesitated. I mean, they weren't pursued. But they were filed. Yes. Do you deny the complaint regarding excessive force against Jamal Tate, age 16? He resisted. There's no footage. No witness. The boy had a broken wrist. Mercer looked at the judge. I stand by my report. And that's the problem, isn't it? Marcus said, voice tightening. Your word is always enough. Even when it shouldn't be. The prosecutor objected again. The judge overruled. Continue. Marcus returned to the projector and displayed side-by-side comparison reports, one from Mercer's body cam log, and one from the department's maintenance records. This is the night Danielle Hayes was arrested, Marcus said. Officer Mercer claims his body camera malfunctioned. But according to maintenance records, his unit had no recorded issues for 6 months prior. He turned back to the jury. That's not a coincidence. That's strategy. Mercer's lips parted. He looked ready to object, to fight, to lie again. But nothing came out. His silence was the loudest thing he had ever said. Judge Price looked over the courtroom, then leaned forward with unusual sharpness. Officer Mercer, he said slowly, do you wish to amend any part of your prior testimony? Mercer swallowed hard. His shoulders sagged just slightly. Then he said, "No, Your Honor." But his voice had lost all weight. It was a whisper. A collapse. Outside, clouds gathered overhead. The sky turned a dull steel gray, like the color of consequence. Inside, the courtroom no longer belonged to Mercer. It belonged to the truth. Danielle remained composed as always. But this time, her stillness radiated something new, not restraint, but presence. She didn't need to speak. Her silence now carried the authority Mercer had once pretended to possess. Her dignity, unshaken. Her truth, unassailable. She had stood alone, and the system had blinked. As the judge dismissed the court for the day, murmurs followed Danielle and Marcus out into the hallway. Cameras swarmed. Reporters reached out. Microphones pressed. But she said nothing. Not yet. Instead, she turned to Marcus as they walked toward the exit. "He'll double down," she said. "Men like him don't go quietly." Marcus nodded. "Then we don't go quietly either." She smiled, just slightly. "Good. I never learned how. It didn't happen all at once." Colin Mercer's fall was not the kind of collapse that made a loud crash. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was slower than that, more insidious. Like a foundation eroding beneath a house. A quiet sinking. Inch by inch. Truth by truth. And by the time he realized what was happening, he was already too far gone. That morning, the courthouse felt different. The usual chatter in the halls had faded into a thick, anticipatory hush. Even the security guards stood a little straighter, eyes a little more alert. Journalists from national outlets now lined the benches, their badges swinging like pendulums of expectation. Everyone knew something was going to break. They just didn't know how loud it would be. Inside the courtroom, Danielle Hayes sat with her hands folded lightly on the table in front of her. Her expression was calm. Composed. But there was a new gravity in her gaze, like she had already seen the end and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Next to her, Marcus Bell flipped through his notes for the 100th time. But his hands no longer shook. The burden of proof had shifted, and he knew it. They had momentum now. But that wasn't enough. They needed closure. They needed Mercer to stand on that witness stand and expose himself, not just as a liar, but as something more dangerous, a man who had believed, all his life, that he would never be questioned. Judge Price entered, his robe sweeping behind him like a shadow. Court is now in session. There was no wasted motion. No opening chatter. "Mr. Avery," the judge said to the prosecutor, "you indicated yesterday that you may wish to recall Officer Mercer." Avery stood stiffly, his jaw clenched. "Yes, Your Honor." There was no confidence in his voice now, only obligation. The prosecutor knew, as everyone else did, that this wasn't about building a case anymore. It was about salvaging something from the wreckage. "Call your witness," the judge said. Mercer stood slowly. It was the first time he had moved without swagger. There was no straightening of the tie. No glances at the jury. No smirk. He walked to the stand like a man walking to his sentencing. He took the oath again, but this time his voice was dry. Brittle. The kind of voice that has run out of script. "Officer Mercer," Avery began, forcing his words out carefully, "you've heard the defense's arguments and the materials they've submitted. Do you still maintain that your body camera malfunctioned during the incident?" Mercer nodded once. "Yes." "And that the defendant attempted to reach for your weapon?" "Yes." His words were fast now. Like he wanted to escape them. "And the complaints against you, do you believe they are relevant to this case?" "No." "Why not?" "Because they weren't proven." Avery hesitated. "Were any of them accurate?" Silence. Mercer blinked. "They were misunderstandings." The room shifted. Marcus stood. Your Honor, may I cross-examine? Judge Price nodded, gesturing firmly. Proceed. Marcus approached the stand slowly, methodically. Officer Mercer, he said, you say the complaints were misunderstandings. Would you classify your false testimony about Ms. Hayes as another misunderstanding? Mercer's eyes flickered. I didn't lie. You testified that she was aggressive. She was. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Even after video evidence proved she wasn't. I said, she escalated. You said she raised her voice. She refused to identify herself. That she lunged for your weapon. None of that is on the footage. Do you still stand by your version? Mercer shifted. The video doesn't show everything. Marcus leaned forward slightly. No. But it showed enough. He turned to the jury. We all saw it. The shove. The words. Women like you don't get to question me. That wasn't taken out of context. That was the context. Mercer's face had begun to flush. He opened his mouth, but Marcus cut in. Officer Mercer, you had no idea who Danielle Hayes was, did you? Mercer looked confused for a moment. You didn't know she was a decorated Navy SEAL. You didn't know she had more training in restraint and judgment than you've had in your entire career. I treated her like I'd treat any suspect, Mercer said. No, Marcus snapped. You treated her like a threat. Because she was standing where you thought she shouldn't. And when she didn't bow to your authority, you created a story that painted her as violent, dangerous, and irrational. Marcus's voice lowered. And you did it because you thought no one would question you. The judge didn't stop him. The courtroom didn't move. Marcus stepped even closer now. You're not here because of Danielle Hayes, he said. You're here because of you. Your pattern. Your choices. Your belief that a badge makes you untouchable. He paused. You're here because you were wrong. Mercer's hands gripped the edge of the stand now. His knuckles were white. His breathing was shallow. And then, like a slow leak in a tire, his composure gave way. You don't understand, he muttered. You don't know what it's like out there. Marcus didn't blink. Enlighten us. Mercer shook his head. You pull over someone at night, they look at you like you're the enemy. They ask questions. They make you feel like you're the one being watched. He swallowed hard. You have to take control. If you don't, you lose it. Marcus tilted his head. So, control justifies fabrication. Mercer's voice was rising now, cracking. I didn't fabricate, I did what I had to do. People like her, they make scenes. They know how to play the system now. The air in the courtroom grew heavier. And what kind of person is she, Officer Mercer? Marcus asked quietly. Mercer froze. He looked out across the courtroom. At the jury. At Danielle. And then, at nothing. He said nothing. He couldn't. Marcus stepped back. No further questions. The judge dismissed Mercer from the stand. He didn't walk away this time. He limped. Emotionally, if not physically. He returned to his seat, but he didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the prosecutor. He didn't look at anyone. His wall had cracked in front of the entire room. And now, it was beginning to collapse. As the courtroom buzzed and the tension spread like heat through metal, Danielle leaned toward Marcus at the table. Her voice was low, even, resolute. It's happening, she said. He nodded. He just told them everything. Without even realizing it. Later that day, during a brief recess, the courthouse lobby became a storm of noise. Reporters stood in clusters, whispering furiously into phones. Headlines were already forming. Officer Mercer's testimony implodes. Jury stunned by defense cross-examination. Decorated seal exposes systemic abuse in court. Inside the gallery, murmurs of support circled Danielle like soft currents. People looked at her not as a defendant, but as a force. As a mirror to a system, they were all beginning to question. Mercer remained in the hallway, shoulders slumped against the far wall, surrounded now by distance, his fellow officers no longer standing at his side. Some had already walked out. Others watched him like a stranger. When the court resumed, the judge made no remarks. He simply gestured. Closing statements. The prosecutor rose. He didn't sound angry. He sounded exhausted. Ladies and gentlemen, he said to the jury, this case is complicated. Emotions run high. Reputations are at stake. But I urge you to focus on the facts. Officer Mercer responded to what he believed was a threat. That's not a crime. He paused, but even he didn't seem to believe his own words anymore. I leave it to your judgment. And then he sat. Quickly. Quietly. Marcus rose slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This was never about resisting arrest, he said. This was about resisting injustice. He looked at Danielle. She stood still while a man in uniform spun lies around her. She remained calm while the world expected her to explode. And now, you've seen it too. Not just the act. But the pattern. The system that let it happen. He looked at the jury. Now it's your turn to stand. The judge gave the final instructions. The jury left the room. And as the door closed behind them, Danielle exhaled for the first time in hours. But her shoulders didn't sag. Because this wasn't relief. This was readiness. The courthouse had never felt so quiet. Not even at night. The buzz that usually haunted the halls, the footsteps, the creaks of benches, the whispers between lawyers, had all gone still, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The jury had been gone for hours. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Not out of spectacle but out of solidarity. They weren't there for drama. They were there for Danielle. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with waiting. Marcus Bell paced beside the defense table, eyes darting occasionally toward the big wooden doors as if willing them to open. His hands were clenched, not in fear, but in urgency. The kind of tension that builds when you've done everything right and still know justice isn't guaranteed. Danielle Hayes sat with her back straight, her eyes forward, her breath slow. The blue blazer she wore was pristine. The seal trident pin on her collar gleamed under the soft lighting, a quiet, defiant badge of truth. But what struck Marcus most was her stillness. She didn't fidget. She didn't tap her fingers. She didn't sigh. She had walked through fire in silence. And now, she waited at its edge, unflinching. The judge re-entered the courtroom alone, his expression unreadable. The clerk followed behind and motioned toward the bailiff. The jury had reached a verdict. The doors creaked open, and 12 men and women reappeared, their faces masked in the solemn neutrality of duty. No one spoke. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Danielle rose. Marcus rose beside her. Across the room, Officer Mercer rose as well, but more slowly. His suit jacket hung looser now, as if it didn't fit him anymore. He looked thinner somehow. Smaller. His eyes flickered between the jurors, trying to read their expressions, but none met his gaze. Judge Price's voice echoed softly. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? A middle-aged black woman in a navy dress stood, her posture elegant and steady. We have, Your Honor. Please read the verdict. She unfolded a piece of paper and cleared her throat. In the case of the State of New York versus Danielle Hayes, we, the jury, find the defendant, not guilty, on all counts. For a moment, there was no reaction. The word seemed to float in the air, suspended, waiting to land. Then it happened. A ripple. A murmur. And then, silence again. But this time, it was not emptiness. It was reverence. Danielle's shoulders dropped half an inch. Not in defeat. Not in relief. In release. The breath she hadn't allowed herself to take in days finally escaped her lips. Marcus placed a hand gently on her back, grounding her. "You did it," he whispered. She shook her head once. "No," she whispered back, "we just told the truth." The foreperson continued reading. Furthermore, the jury unanimously recommends a formal investigation into the conduct of Officer Colin Mercer and his prior complaints within the department. That was when the room shifted. Gasps. Shocked whispers. Mercer's face drained of color. The judge's gavel came down sharply. Order. But even he seemed affected. He looked at the jury and nodded slowly, his voice now carrying a tone of something rare, conviction. The court acknowledges the jury's recommendation. Officer Mercer, I suggest you retain legal counsel. This matter is far from over. Mercer didn't move. His hands gripped the edge of the table. He looked not angry, but hollow. Empty. Like a man whose entire illusion of protection had finally shattered. Danielle stepped back as Marcus motioned for her to sit. She didn't. She turned slightly, faced the gallery, and nodded once toward the crowd, toward the strangers who had believed in her, the veterans who had shown up in uniform to stand in silent support, the women in the back row who wiped tears from their cheeks. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes did it for her. The judge dismissed the courtroom, and as the crowd filed out, Danielle remained for a moment, still in place. Watching. Breathing. Reclaiming. Outside, the courthouse steps were lit by late afternoon light. A golden hue spilled across the city square, and the press surged forward, but gently, with more curiosity than aggression. Lieutenant Hayes, any comment? Danielle, what does this mean to you? Do you think justice was served? She stopped halfway down the steps and turned. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the clamor like a clean blade. This wasn't just justice for me, she said. This was justice for every person who has been silenced by authority, who has been doubted because of their skin, dismissed because of their gender, or disrespected despite their service. I didn't fight back with fists. I fought with the truth. And today, the truth won. Reporters scribbled. Cameras flashed. But none of that mattered. Danielle turned and walked down the rest of the steps slowly, Marcus beside her, his hand still gripping the case file that now no longer mattered. Behind her, Mercer emerged moments later, surrounded by officers who no longer stood with him but simply followed protocol. He didn't stop for questions. He didn't speak. He disappeared into a waiting car, his world crumbling behind him. Days later, the Internal Affairs Division announced a full investigation. Weeks later, Mercer was suspended without pay. A month after that, he resigned before charges could be filed. But Danielle's story didn't end in that courtroom. It began there. Invitations came in. Speaking events. Interviews. Not just as a veteran. Not just as a defendant acquitted. But as a voice. As a symbol of restraint, courage, and unwavering dignity. At a college auditorium in D.C., she stood before a crowd of law students and said, "I was taught to never fire unless there was no other choice. In that courtroom, I held my fire. I let the system do what it was supposed to. And that took more strength than any battlefield I've ever faced." They rose to their feet. Later, she was asked if she regretted not revealing her identity earlier. She smiled gently and answered, "People don't believe black women when we say we're telling the truth. So I let them see it. Piece by piece. Until they couldn't unsee it anymore." Her words echoed across social media, across cities, across communities hungry for accountability. Across dinner tables, where parents showed their children what courage looked like. And slowly, a movement began to shift. Because Danielle didn't just win. She didn't just survive. She redefined what victory looked like. It wasn't just walking free. It was walking forward. Alone at first. And then, never alone again. In a quiet moment months later, Danielle visited the cemetery where her father, a fellow Navy SEAL, was buried. She placed a folded flag beside his headstone, her trident pin resting atop it. "They tried, Daddy," she whispered. "But your daughter stood her ground." The wind rustled the trees gently. And somewhere, deep in the silence, the truth rested peacefully, at last. It began with a single courtroom. One woman. One story. But stories like Danielle Hayes never really belong to one person. Because when a woman stands up in the middle of a system built to silence her, when she speaks calmly, and refuses to back down, not only does she reclaim her voice, but she becomes a vessel for others to find theirs. Danielle never set out to become a symbol. She wasn't chasing headlines. She didn't want fame. She didn't even want sympathy. All she ever wanted was to walk home in peace. To exist, like anyone else, without having to defend her humanity. But the world had different plans. After the trial, things moved quickly. Too quickly, sometimes. Her inbox is filled with media requests, podcast invitations, panel discussions, and awards. Her name became a hashtag, then a movement. People started using her story in classrooms. Activists quoted her in rallies. Even officers in training academies were shown her courtroom testimony during ethics modules. 1 year later, Danielle stood before a packed auditorium at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. The event was titled, "Truth Under Pressure: How Courage Changes Systems." She hadn't planned to speak that night. She was there as a guest. But when the keynote speaker unexpectedly canceled, the organizers turned to her. And something inside her said yes, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She walked to the stage without notes. Without a teleprompter. Without a script. Just her truth. She looked out at the crowd, students, journalists, lawmakers, veterans, teachers, parents, and began. "I was taught to never raise my voice unless necessary. In the Navy, we learn to move quietly, quickly, and with purpose. But I've learned something even more powerful than silence: clarity. In that courtroom, I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending a principle, that the truth deserves space, no matter who's speaking it. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. I didn't fight with fire. I simply told the truth. And I refused to let that truth be interrupted." The room was silent. She could feel their attention, not the kind of people give out of politeness, but the kind they give when something is shifting inside them. She continued. "You see, power often hides behind performance. Uniforms. Titles. Badges. But real strength? It shows up in restraint. In self-respect. In the decision to stand your ground, not with fists, but with facts. I didn't survive that arrest because I was a Navy SEAL. I survived because I knew who I was long before anyone else did. And now, I want every black girl, every woman, every person who's ever been looked at like they don't belong, to know, you do belong. Not just in courtrooms. Not just in boardrooms. Not just in the history books. You belong in this conversation. You are the conversation." When she stepped off the stage, the standing ovation lasted longer than her speech. But that wasn't what mattered to Danielle. What mattered were the people who came up to her after. A young girl, no older than 11, who whispered, "I want to be brave like you." A middle-aged man, tearful, said, "My daughter is joining the police academy. I hope she grows up to protect people like you, not prosecute them." And a retired black officer who pulled Danielle aside and said quietly, "I spent years in silence. Watching things I shouldn't have let slide. You made me want to start talking again. That was the moment Danielle realized, justice isn't just about verdicts. It's about echoes. The ripple effects of her case began to reach places she had never imagined. Her testimony was cited in policy proposals. 2 states proposed mandatory external investigations for all use of force incidents involving officers with prior misconduct complaints. One of those bills passed. Another is still gaining traction. At universities, her trial is taught in law and ethics classes under the heading, Narratives That Disrupted the System. A national veterans group launched an initiative called Operation Truth First, in her name, aimed at empowering service members to advocate for civilian justice at home. And still, Danielle remained grounded. She never saw herself as a hero. Heroes, she said, don't get to rest. Survivors do. And she was finally learning how. But she also knew that silence, even peaceful silence, can become dangerous if left too long. So she wrote. She spoke. She taught. She shared her story, not as a warning, but as a call. Not a call to arms. But a call to awareness. To responsibility. To transformation. She told people, don't wait until it happens to someone you love. Start asking questions now. Hold your institutions accountable. Protect the voices that don't get invited to the table. And when the table shakes, don't run, listen. One evening, Danielle sat with Marcus Bell, now a partner at a growing civil rights law firm. They were overlooking the Hudson River from a rooftop event honoring community leaders. I still don't know how you stayed so calm, Marcus said. I would have broken halfway through. Danielle smiled, taking a slow sip of tea. I wasn't calm, she said. I was focused. There's a difference. He nodded, looking out at the shimmering water. Do you think it was worth it? He asked. The risk? The exposure? The fight? She didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, yes. Because I didn't win alone. I carried 1,000 stories into that courtroom. And when I walked out, I left the door open for 1,000 more. She turned to face him. I don't want to be remembered as the woman who beat the system. I want to be remembered as the woman who demanded it do better. Today, Danielle continues her advocacy, but on her terms. She speaks at schools. She consults on policing reform. She's working on a memoir titled, Calm Under Fire. Not to capitalize on her pain, but to document her clarity. Her composure. Her conviction. Because somewhere out there, someone is being pulled over right now. Someone is being questioned for standing on a sidewalk. Someone is being disbelieved because their skin, gender, or silence doesn't look like power to those in charge. And that someone needs to know. There is space for your truth. There is strength in your restraint. And there is a future worth fighting for, without having to fight alone. To the community, Danielle's story is more than a courtroom win. It is a blueprint. For courage. For compassion. For what justice can look like when we choose to listen first, not judge. When we protect dignity, not egos. When we uplift the voices we were taught to ignore. She reminds us that change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks into a courtroom, dressed in humility, and speaks only when it's ready. And when it does, it changes everything. Life lesson from Danielle Hayes' story. Danielle Hayes' story isn't just about a courtroom victory, it's about reclaiming dignity in the face of systemic injustice. Her calm defiance reminds us that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet. Controlled. Focused. In a world where power is often misused and truth buried under uniforms or titles, Danielle showed us that integrity, clarity, and resilience can break through even the deepest silence. Her journey teaches us that we don't have to shout to be heard, and we don't have to fight with fists to win. We can challenge injustice with presence. With truth. With patience. And above all, with community. She didn't walk alone. She stood on the shoulders of those who came before her, and now she holds the door open for others to step through. Whether you're facing unfair treatment at school, at work, or in society, know this: your story matters. Speak your truth. Own your space. Protect your dignity. Let Danielle's story inspire you to listen deeper, question more bravely, and stand up more compassionately, not just for yourself, but for others who might still be afraid to. If this message moved you, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice, courage, and human truth. Together, we rise.